On a Thursday evening in October 1948, 4 Boeing engineers checked into the Van Cleve Hotel in Dayton, Ohio. They had just walked out of one of the worst meetings of their careers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Their latest bomber design, a turboprop-powered aircraft they had spent months developing, had been rejected outright. Colonel Henry Pete Worden, Chief of Bomber Development, had barely glanced at their proposal before sending them away with a challenge. Come back with something better. They had until Monday morning. What happened over the next 72 hours would become the most productive weekend in aerospace history. George Scherer, Boeing's head of aerodynamics, sat in the hotel lobby that Thursday night trying to salvage 3 years of failed designs. Since November 1945, when Air Materiel Command first issued requirements for a new strategic bomber capable of operating without dependence on foreign bases, Boeing had gone through iteration after iteration. The Model 462 had resembled a scaled-up B-29 with 6 turboprop engines. Rejected. The Model 46416, 46417, 46429, and 46435 had shuffled between 4 and 6 turboprops, straight and swept wings, conventional and flying wing configurations, all rejected or abandoned. The Air Force had nearly killed the entire program on December 11, 1947. Only a personal plea from Boeing President William McPherson Allen to Secretary of the Air Force Stuart Symington had kept it alive. By mid-1948, the design was still a turboprop, and everyone knew turboprops were already becoming obsolete. That Thursday evening at the hotel, Scherer was joined by Art Carlson and Vaughn Blumenthal from the design team. Ed Wells, Boeing's Vice President of Engineering, flew in from Seattle that night. Working through the early morning hours, they roughed out a concept using pure jet engines instead of turboprops. Friday morning, they returned to Colonel Worden's office with their preliminary sketch. Worden looked at it and replied, "I don't think you've gone far enough." Wells told him they would be back Monday morning with something complete. Back at the Van Cleve Hotel Friday afternoon, 2 more Boeing engineers arrived. Bob Withington, who had helped design the revolutionary swept wings on the B-57 Stratojet, and Maynard Pennell, assistant program manager for the B-29. With an open telephone line to analysts back in Seattle running calculations, the 6 men began designing an entirely new airplane from scratch. They worked through Friday night, all day Saturday, and into Sunday. Scherer walked to a Dayton hobby shop and bought balsa wood, glue, and silver paint. Back at the hotel, he carved a 14-inch scale model of their design. Ed Wells, a skilled draftsman, produced detailed engineering drawings by hand. The others calculated weight, thrust, fuel capacity, range, and performance. Every number had to work. Every calculation had to prove the aircraft could meet the Air Force specifications. 5,000-mile combat radius, 10,000-pound bomb load, cruise speed of 300 miles per hour at 34,000 feet. By Sunday evening, the design was complete. They hired a stenographer to type their 33-page proposal overnight. On Monday morning, October 25, 1948, Scherer walked back into Colonel Worden's office at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and placed the neatly bound proposal on his desk. Next to it, he set the silver balsa wood model. The design was designated Model 46449. It featured 35-degree swept wings spanning 185 feet, 8 jet engines hung in pairs beneath the wings in 4 underwing pods. Bicycle landing gear sat under the fuselage with small outrigger wheels at the wingtips for ground stability. It was essentially the B-52 as the world would come to know it for the next 8 decades. Colonel Worden picked up the model and studied it from every angle. The Air Force was sold. Development moved rapidly. Boeing received a contract for 2 prototypes. The YB-52 made its maiden flight on April 15, 1952, with Boeing's legendary chief test pilot Alvin Tex Johnston at the controls alongside Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Guy Townsend. The flight lasted approximately 3 hours. The XB-52, delayed by a pneumatic system failure during ground testing, followed on October 2, 1952. Both prototypes featured tandem seating and a bubble canopy. The production B-52A introduced the side-by-side cockpit arrangement that would define the aircraft. When the Soviet Union's comparable Tu-95 Bear strategic bomber took flight the same year, it used turboprop engines. Boeing's gamble on pure jet power had leapfrogged an entire generation of bomber technology. The swept-wing design, building on innovations from the smaller B-47 Stratojet, gave the B-52 performance that turboprops could never match. Boeing produced 744 B-52s between 1952 and 1962 across two facilities. Production began at Boeing Seattle Plant 2 and transferred entirely to Boeing Wichita, Kansas, in 1957. The variants trace an arc of steady improvement, each addressing lessons learned from the previous model. The B-52A, with only 3 aircraft built, served exclusively as test platforms, entering service on November 27, 1957. The B-52B, with 50 built, became the first operational variant. Aircraft 528711 was delivered to the 93rd Heavy Bombardment Wing at Castle Air Force Base, California, on June 29, 1955, marking the bomber's entry into Strategic Air Command service. The B-52C, with 35 built, added larger 3,000-gallon external fuel tanks for extended range. The B-52D, with 170 built, became the primary Vietnam War workhorse after receiving the big belly modification that increased its internal bomb capacity from 27 to 84 500-pound bombs. The B-52E and F, with 189 built respectively, introduced improved navigation and weapons systems. The F model was the last built in Seattle. The B-52G represented the most radical redesign in the aircraft's evolution. 193 were built. It featured a shorter vertical tail fin, wet wing integral fuel tanks replacing the bladder tanks of earlier models, boosting total fuel capacity to approximately 48,000 gallons. The ailerons were eliminated entirely in favor of spoiler-only roll control, reducing wing structural weight. Most significantly, the tail gunner was relocated from his isolated compartment in the aircraft's tail to the forward crew compartment, where he operated the defensive guns via radar and closed-circuit television. The B-52H was the definitive and final model, with 102 built. It introduced 8 Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofan engines, producing 17,000 pounds of thrust each, a 30% improvement in efficiency over the J-57 turbojets of earlier variants. The quad 50 caliber tail guns were replaced with a single 20mm Vulcan cannon. The last B-52H, serial number 610040, rolled off the Wichita production line on June 22, 1962, and was delivered to the Air Force on October 26, 1962. That specific aircraft remains in active service today, more than 6 decades later. General Curtis LeMay, who commanded Strategic Air Command from 1948 to 1957, transformed the B-52 into the centerpiece of American nuclear deterrence. Under LeMay's demanding leadership, SAC maintained 1/3 of its bomber force on 15-minute ground alert at all times. Aircraft sat fully fueled and armed with thermonuclear weapons, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Crews lived in Spartan alert facilities within sprinting distance of their aircraft on rotating 5-day tours. When the klaxon sounded, they had minutes to reach their bombers and begin the launch sequence. Minimum interval takeoff procedures had bombers launching nose to tail through dense smoke from the aircraft ahead, using pyrotechnic engine starters to shave precious seconds off response time. The margin between survival and annihilation was measured in minutes. After the Soviet Sputnik satellite launch raised the specter of intercontinental ballistic missiles destroying ground-based forces before they could launch, LeMay's successor, General Thomas Power, pushed for airborne alert. If bombers were already in the sky, they could not be destroyed on their runways. Operation Chrome Dome, formally begun in November 1961, kept 12 nuclear-armed B-52s airborne at all times. Each aircraft flew approximately 24-hour sorties, covering 10,000 miles along 2 primary routes, carefully planned to maximize deterrent effect. The northern route circumnavigated Canada via Newfoundland and Alaska, maintaining bombers within striking distance of Soviet targets. The southern route traversed the Atlantic Ocean toward the Mediterranean. A dedicated hardhead orbit near Thule, Greenland, kept aircraft close to the ballistic missile early warning system radar station, ensuring bombers would receive attack notification with maximum time to respond. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, Strategic Air Command escalated to Defense Condition 2. The only confirmed time in American history any military force has reached that alert level. Chrome Dome operations surged dramatically. 65 nuclear-armed B-52s flew continuously, with 75 sorties launched daily. Over the approximately 30-day crisis, B-52s flew 2,088 sorties, totaling 41,168 flying hours. The full weight of American nuclear air power was mobilized. A total of 1,436 bombers stood on ground alert alongside 145 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Together they carried approximately 2,900 nuclear weapons targeted at the Soviet Union. The crisis demonstrated exactly what Chrome Dome was designed to prove. America's retaliatory capability was survivable. No Soviet first strike could eliminate it. The bombers already in the air guaranteed annihilation in response. The nuclear weapons carried by B-52s during the Cold War represented the most destructive arsenal ever assembled. Aircraft could carry multiple weapons ranging from the B-28 at 1.45 megatons to the B-41, the highest yield nuclear weapon ever deployed by the United States, at 25 megatons. The B-53, at 9 megatons, was designed specifically for super-hardened underground targets that smaller weapons could not destroy. For standoff capability, B-52Gs carried the Hound Dog cruise missile, a Mach 2 weapon that could be launched from outside Soviet air defenses. From December 1982, the air-launched cruise missile gave B-52s the ability to strike targets from hundreds of miles away, well beyond the range of defensive systems. A single B-52H could carry 20 of these missiles, 12 on external pylons under the wings, and 8 on an internal rotary launcher in the bomb bay. Chrome Dome's relentless operational tempo, with aircraft flying continuous 24-hour sorties year after year, eventually produced catastrophic accidents that would end the program. The most chilling incident occurred on January 24, 1961. A B-52G from the 41st Strategic Wing was cruising over eastern North Carolina when it suffered a catastrophic structural failure caused by a fuel leak. The aircraft broke apart in mid-air over Goldsboro, releasing its payload of 2 Mach 39 thermonuclear bombs. Each warhead yielded 3.8 megatons, 250 times the power of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. One bomb deployed its parachute and descended slowly to Earth, landing upright in a farm field. When investigators examined the weapon, they discovered its arming sequence had almost completely initiated. The safing pins had pulled. The arming rods had retracted. The generator had actuated. The batteries had activated. The timer had run. The differential pressure switch had operated. Upon impact with the ground, the crush switch closed, sending a firing signal to the nuclear core. Only one component prevented detonation. The MC722 arm-safe switch was found in the safe position. A Sandia National Laboratories engineer named Parker Jones later wrote in an internal report that one simple dynamo technology, low-voltage switch, stood between the United States and a major catastrophe. Had that single switch been in the armed position, a 2,500 kiloton nuclear fireball would have devastated eastern North Carolina. The second bomb did not deploy its parachute. It fell straight down and buried itself deep in the muddy farmland. The conventional explosives in the weapon did not detonate, but the thermonuclear secondary stage, containing weapons-grade uranium, could not be recovered. Despite extensive excavation, the nuclear material remains buried in North Carolina soil to this day, too deep beneath the water table to safely retrieve. On January 17, 1966, another disaster struck during a routine Chrome Dome mission. A B-52G on the southern route was conducting aerial refueling over southeastern Spain when it collided with its KC-135 tanker aircraft near the village of Palomares. The tanker exploded on impact, killing all 4 crew members instantly. 3 of the 7 B-52 crew also died. 4 crew members successfully ejected and survived. The collision released 4 B-28 hydrogen bombs. Two of the weapons struck the ground near the village, and their conventional high-explosive components detonated on impact. While no nuclear explosion occurred, the blast scattered radioactive plutonium across Spanish farmland, contaminating approximately 500 acres of agricultural land. Spanish and American military personnel spent months removing contaminated soil and vegetation. A third bomb landed intact and was quickly recovered, but the fourth bomb fell into the Mediterranean Sea and disappeared beneath the waves. For 80 anxious days, American naval forces searched the waters off the Spanish coast. The weapon was finally located with crucial assistance from a local fisherman named Francisco Simo Orts, who had witnessed the collision and could estimate where the bomb entered the water. The manned submersible DSV Alvin located the bomb at approximately 2,800 feet, but the physical recovery required an unmanned robot called CURV-1. The robot became entangled in the weapon's parachute shroud lines, and both were hoisted together to the surface on April 7, 1966, ending a diplomatic crisis that had severely strained relations with Spain. The final accident that ended Chrome Dome occurred on January 21, 1968. A B-52G called Hobo 28 was flying the hard-head orbit near Thule Air Base in Greenland when fire broke out in the crew compartment. A crew member's seat cushions had been placed over a heating vent and ignited. The fire spread rapidly, filling the aircraft with smoke and making control impossible. 6 of the 7 crew members ejected successfully and were rescued. The co-pilot, Captain Leonard Svitenko, occupied a position without an ejection seat. He was killed when the aircraft crashed. The B-52 impacted on frozen North Star Bay, approximately 7 miles from Thule Air Base. It was carrying 4 B-28 thermonuclear bombs. The conventional explosives in all 4 weapons detonated on impact. The blasts shattered the sea ice and scattered an estimated 10 terabecquerels of radioactive plutonium across roughly 3 square miles of Arctic ice. Danish and American personnel worked for months in brutal polar conditions to recover debris and contaminated material, but much of the plutonium sank beneath the ice into the bay. The following day, January 22, 1968, the Air Force permanently terminated Operation Chrome Dome. The era of continuous airborne nuclear alert was over. The B-52 first went to war over Vietnam on June 18, 1965. 27 B-52Fs launched from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam to strike a suspected Viet Cong jungle stronghold near Ben Cat in South Vietnam. The mission was designated Operation Arc Light. During the pre-strike aerial refueling rendezvous, 2 of the bombers collided in mid-air and crashed into the Pacific Ocean. 8 crew members were killed, the first B-52 casualties of the Vietnam War. Despite this inauspicious beginning, Arc Light grew over the next 8 years into one of the largest sustained bombing campaigns in military history. The B-52D variant, with its big belly modification completed on 155 aircraft by September 1967, could carry an unprecedented bomb load, 84 500-pound bombs packed into the internal bay, plus 24 more on external wing pylons, 108 bombs totaling 60,000 pounds of ordnance from a single aircraft. B-52s operated from 2 primary bases. Andersen Air Force Base on Guam required 10 to 12-hour round-trip missions with multiple aerial refuelings over the Pacific. U Tapao Royal Thai Navy Airfield in Thailand offered much shorter 2 to 3-hour missions, allowing more sorties per aircraft per day. The bombers flew in 3 ship formations, called cells, with each aircraft timed to release its bombs in sequence. The combined bomb loads of a single cell could obliterate everything within a target area, roughly 1.2 miles long and 0.6 of a mile wide. Ground-based combat skyspot radar stations guided the bombers to their precise release points from up to 200 miles away. The B-52 crews never saw their targets. They flew at 30,000 feet, released on radio command from the ground controller, and turned for home. Below them, the jungle erupted in fire. The campaign reached its violent crescendo in December 1972 with Operation Linebacker Two, known to history as the Christmas bombings. Peace negotiations between the United States and North Vietnam had collapsed on December 13. President Nixon ordered Strategic Air Command to launch a maximum effort against military and industrial targets in Hanoi and Haiphong, the most heavily defended airspace in the world. The force assembled was enormous, 207 B-52s deployed to Southeast Asia, representing nearly half of the Air Force's entire manned bomber fleet. On the first night, December 18, 129 B-52s struck in 3 massive waves, the largest attacking bomber force since the 1,000-plane raids of World War II. North Vietnamese gunners, supplied with the latest Soviet surface-to-air missiles, fired over 200 SA-2 missiles into the sky. 3 B-52s were shot down. The following 2 nights saw similar attacks with similar losses, but on the third night, December 20th, disaster struck. Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska had insisted on identical tactics for every raid. Same approach routes, same altitudes, same heading, and critically, the same mandatory post-target right turn that had been standard procedure for nuclear bombing runs. That turn, designed for nuclear missions where the aircraft needed to escape the blast radius of its own weapons, was catastrophic over Hanoi. It forced the bombers into 120-knot headwinds, slowing them to a crawl over the most heavily defended point in the target area. It pointed their electronic countermeasures antennas away from the radars they were trying to jam, and it presented the largest possible radar cross-section to enemy missile guidance systems. North Vietnamese missile crews, having studied 3 nights of identical attack patterns, knew exactly where to aim. They fired salvos with devastating precision. 6 B-52s were shot down that single night, a 7% attrition rate. If sustained, that loss rate would destroy the entire bomber force in a matter of weeks. Crews returning to Utapao were furious. Brigadier General Glenn Sullivan, the wing commander, sent an unprecedented message directly to the commander of Strategic Air Command, demanding immediate tactical changes. Vary the inbound routes, change the altitudes, eliminate the post-target turn, attack from multiple directions simultaneously so defensive gunners could not predict where the bombers would appear. After a tense Christmas Day stand down for the holiday, command authority relented. When attacks resumed on December 26, tactics had completely changed. 120 B-52s hit targets in Hanoi and Haiphong simultaneously from multiple compass headings, arriving over their targets within a compressed 15-minute window. The concentrated electronic countermeasures overwhelmed North Vietnamese radar. Defensive gunners could not track so many aircraft from so many directions at once. Losses dropped dramatically. By December 29, North Vietnamese missile batteries could fire only 23 SA-2s, down from over 200 on the first night. 2/3 of their missile storage facilities had been destroyed. Their logistics capacity was shattered, with import capability dropping from 160,000 tons to 30,000 tons per month. 80% of North Vietnam's electrical power generation was eliminated. 2 extraordinary air-to-air engagements occurred during Linebacker Two, the last aerial victories ever scored by bomber gunners. On December 18, Staff Sergeant Samuel Turner was manning the quad 50 caliber tail guns of his B-52D when a North Vietnamese MiG-21 fighter closed in for the kill. Turner opened fire with a 6-second burst, 700 rounds streaming into the darkness. The MiG exploded in a ball of fire, debris raining down over the Red River Delta. It was the first confirmed B-52 air-to-air kill. On Christmas Eve, December 24, Airman First Class Albert Moore became the second and last bomber gunner to shoot down an enemy jet. Just 18 years old, Moore was defending his B-52D, nicknamed Diamond Lil, when another MiG-21 attacked. His accurate fire destroyed the fighter. Both men received the Silver Star. Turner's aircraft is now preserved at Fairchild Air Force Base. Diamond Lil stands as a gate guardian at the United States Air Force Academy. Linebacker Two lasted 11 days. B-52s flew 729 completed sorties and dropped 15,237 tons of bombs. 15 bombers were shot down. 33 crew members were killed or remain missing. 33 were taken prisoner. 26 were rescued. North Vietnam signaled willingness to resume negotiations on December 26, even as the bombs continued falling. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27, 1973, over the entire course of the Vietnam War, from June 1965 through the final mission on August 15, 1973, B-52s flew 126,615 combat sorties. 31 aircraft were lost, 18 to enemy action and 13 to operational accidents. The B-52 wrote its next chapter in the Persian Gulf during Operation Desert Storm. On the morning of January 16, 1991, 7 B-52Gs from the 596th Bomb Squadron at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana launched a mission that would set multiple records. The operation was nicknamed Secret Squirrel by its crews. The bombers flew 35 hours without landing, covering 14,000 miles round trip from Louisiana to Iraq and back. It was the longest combat mission in aviation history at that time. Their weapons were not conventional bombs, but 35 AGM-86C conventional air-launched cruise missiles, precision-guided weapons that could find their targets using satellite navigation. The B-52s launched their missiles against Iraqi power plants and communications facilities from hundreds of miles away, well beyond the range of any air defense system. This marked the first combat use of GPS-guided weapons, demonstrating that a bomber designed in the 1940s could deliver 21st-century precision from the continental United States without forward basing. Throughout Desert Storm, approximately 74 B-52Gs flew 1,741 sorties from bases spanning 5 countries: Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, Moron in Spain, Fairford in England, and Incirlik in Turkey. They delivered approximately 27,000 tons of munitions, roughly 30% of all coalition bomb tonnage dropped during the war. The psychological impact exceeded even the physical destruction. Post-war intelligence debriefs revealed that the B-52 influenced an estimated 24% of Iraqi soldiers to desert their positions. Iraqi prisoners consistently identified the B-52 and the A-10 attack aircraft as the 2 coalition weapons they feared most. The sustained bombing of Republican Guard positions shattered unit cohesion before ground forces ever engaged. 1 B-52G was lost during the war, when a catastrophic electrical failure struck the aircraft during its return flight to Diego Garcia. 3 of the 6 crew members were killed. It was the only B-52 lost in Desert Storm. When Operation Enduring Freedom began over Afghanistan on October 7, 2001, 10 B-52Hs staged forward to Diego Garcia and flew 16-hour round-trip missions into the Hindu Kush Mountains. But the aircraft that arrived over Afghanistan was fundamentally different from the carpet bomber of Vietnam. The integration of the Joint Direct Attack Munition had transformed B-52 capabilities. JDAM is a relatively simple device, a tail kit containing satellite navigation electronics that can be attached to conventional gravity bombs. The kit converts unguided weapons into precision munitions capable of striking within 10 to 15 meters of their intended target, regardless of weather or visibility. Working in concert with Special Operations Forces on the ground who could identify targets and transmit precise coordinates via satellite communication, B-52s began providing close air support, an astonishing role reversal for an aircraft designed to destroy entire cities with nuclear weapons. Ground controllers could call for B-52 strikes against targets mere hundreds of meters from friendly positions, confident the precision weapons would hit exactly where aimed. At Tora Bora in December 2001, B-52s formed the backbone of the air campaign against al-Qaeda fighters entrenched in cave complexes. The bombers operated in 72-hour non-stop cycles during the most intense phase of the battle, with aircraft constantly overhead ready to drop on any identified target. The sustained precision bombardment was so intense that intercepted radio communications revealed Osama bin Laden apologizing to his fighters for bringing them into such overwhelming firepower. During the opening weeks of Operation Enduring Freedom, the 3 heavy bomber types, B-52, B-1 and B-2, accounted for 80% of all munitions dropped in Afghanistan. The proportion of precision-guided weapons had risen from just 9% in Desert Storm to approximately 70% over Afghanistan. In Operation Iraqi Freedom, beginning in March 2003, B-52Hs participated in the shock and awe campaign that opened the war. On March 21, B-52s contributed to the largest cruise missile strike in military history, launching 76 missiles against Iraqi military command and control targets in a single coordinated attack. The bombers flew nearly 300 combat sorties over Iraq and dropped 3.2 million pounds of explosives alongside 9 million propaganda leaflets. By 2016, B-52s deployed to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar to support operations against the Islamic State. Over approximately 2 years of continuous operations, they flew 1,850 combat missions and delivered nearly 12,000 precision weapons against terrorist targets across Iraq and Syria. In June 2017, the 23rd Bomb Squadron flew 400 consecutive combat missions without a single maintenance delay, a record for sustained operations that had not been matched since Linebacker Two. The list of aircraft designed to replace the B-52 reads like a catalogue of aerospace ambition, brought low by technological hubris and fiscal reality. The North American XB-70 Valkyrie was conceived as the ultimate high-altitude penetrating bomber. Its 6 engines would push the massive delta-wing aircraft to Mach 3 at 70,000 feet, too fast and too high for any Soviet interceptor or missile to catch. The program consumed billions of dollars and produced extraordinary technology, including a honeycomb stainless steel structure that could withstand the extreme heat of sustained supersonic flight. But the Valkyrie was designed for a threat environment that ceased to exist. Soviet surface-to-air missiles improved faster than anyone anticipated. Intercontinental ballistic missiles made manned bombers seem obsolete for nuclear delivery. On June 8, 1966, one of the 2 XB-70 prototypes was destroyed in a mid-air collision during a publicity photo shoot when an F-104 chase plane drifted into the Valkyrie's wing, killing both the F-104 pilot and the XB-70 co-pilot. The program was cancelled without producing an operational aircraft. The B-1 program suffered an even more tortured existence. Originally conceived as a Mach 2 variable geometry wing bomber that could penetrate at high altitude or dash beneath radar at treetop level, the B-1A was cancelled by President Carter on June 30, 1977. Carter argued that air-launched cruise missiles, which could be carried by existing B-52s, offered the same capability at a fraction of the cost. President Reagan revived the program in 1981 as the B-1B, ordering 100 aircraft with a focus on low-level penetration rather than high-altitude speed. But the B-1B has been plagued by reliability problems throughout its service life. The demanding low-altitude mission profile inflicts severe structural fatigue on the airframe. Engine fires grounded the entire fleet in 1990, just months before Desert Storm, where the B-1B never flew a single combat mission. Maintenance requirements run between 48 and 60 hours of work for every hour of flight time. The aircraft's nuclear capability was stripped under treaty obligations in the 1990s. Today, only 45 B-1Bs remain in service, and the entire fleet is scheduled to begin retirement in fiscal year 2028. The B-2 Spirit was perhaps the most ambitious and most expensive replacement ever attempted. Originally planned as a fleet of 132 aircraft, designed to penetrate deep into Soviet airspace, using revolutionary radar, absorbing stealth technology, the B-2 represented the absolute cutting edge of aerospace engineering. Every surface was carefully shaped to scatter radar waves. The entire aircraft was coated in specialized materials that absorbed, rather than reflected radar energy. But the Cold War ended before mass production began. The original order was slashed to just 21 aircraft. When total program costs were divided among so few airframes, each B-2 carried a price tag of $2.13 billion, making it the most expensive aircraft ever built. Maintaining the sensitive radar-absorbing coating requires 119 hours of specialized work for every hour of flight, all performed in climate-controlled hangars. One aircraft was lost in a crash on Guam in 2008, when moisture contamination caused the flight control system to fail immediately after takeoff. Another was retired after a fire in 2022. Only 19 B-2 Spirits remain operational, all concentrated at a single base. The B-2's annual operating cost per aircraft approaches $63 million. The B-52 costs roughly $25 million less than half as much for an aircraft that can carry comparable payloads over comparable distances. The newest American bomber, the Northrop Grumman B-21 Raider, made its first flight on November 10, 2023, but significantly, the B-21 is designed to replace the B-1 and B-2, not the B-52. Air Force leadership has embraced a two-bomber future. The B-21 will serve as the penetrating stealth platform for operations in highly contested airspace where enemy air defenses must be defeated. The B-52J will serve as the standoff arsenal platform, launching cruise missiles and hypersonic weapons from safe distances beyond the reach of enemy defenses. The B-52's extraordinary longevity is not accidental. Boeing's engineers, building on lessons learned from the B-47 and earlier aircraft, incorporated design features that have proven remarkably tolerant of adaptation and age. The aircraft's 185-foot wingspan conceals one of its most remarkable characteristics. The wings were deliberately designed to flex rather than resist loads. Test pilot Tex Johnston documented wingtips traveling through a 32-foot arc between negative and positive load conditions. On the ground, when the aircraft is fully loaded with fuel, the wingtips droop approximately 9 feet below their flight position. During aggressive maneuvering at 3.5 G, they can flex upward to 35 degrees above level. This was an early application of aeroelastic design philosophy. Rather than building wings stiff enough to resist all loads without deformation, which would require enormous structural weight, Boeing designed wings that relieved stress by bending. The heavy engine pods serve double duty as flutter dampeners, their mass preventing dangerous harmonic vibrations during flight. The result is a wing structure that accumulates fatigue damage far more slowly than a rigid design would. The crosswind landing gear system is unique among large aircraft. The 4 main gear trucks can rotate up to 20 degrees relative to the fuselage. This allows the B-52 to land in a crab, with its nose pointed into a crosswind while the wheels roll straight down the runway centerline. Pilots do not need to kick out the crab at the last moment before touchdown, as they must in conventional aircraft. The cavernous internal volume was insisted upon by General Curtis LeMay, who demanded an aircraft large enough to accommodate weapons and systems that did not yet exist. That insistence proved remarkably prescient. The bomb bay and fuselage have absorbed 7 decades of technological evolution: iron bombs from the 1950s, nuclear gravity weapons in dozens of variants, Hound Dog cruise missiles in the 1960s, air-launched cruise missiles in the 1980s, precision-guided JDAMs in the 2000s, and now hypersonic boost glide vehicles that did not exist even in theory when the aircraft was designed. The airframe's structural life limit is calculated at approximately 32,500 to 37,500 flight hours, based on fatigue analysis of the upper wing surfaces. The current fleet average has climbed past 20,000 hours after decades of continuous operations, yet most aircraft retain substantial structural life remaining. When B-52H Serial 600034, nicknamed Wise Guy, was pulled from storage at the Davis-Monthan Boneyard in May 2019 after 11 years in the Arizona desert, it had accumulated 17,000 flight hours during its previous service. Even at that relatively high figure, significant margin remained before reaching structural limits. Maintenance crews restoring Wise Guy found a handwritten note left on an interior panel by the personnel who had placed it in storage years earlier. The note read, "This is a cold warrior that stood sentinel over America from the darkest days of the Cold War to the global fight against terror. Take good care of her until we need her again." The B-52H fleet is now undergoing the most comprehensive modernization in the aircraft's history. The total cost is estimated at $48.6 billion. Upon completion, the aircraft will receive a new designation, B-52J, reflecting the extent of the changes. The centerpiece of the modernization is the Commercial Engine Replacement Program, awarded to Rolls-Royce North America on September 24, 2021, for up to $2.6 billion. The program replaces the Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofan engines, which have powered the H model since 1960 and went out of production in 1985, with 608 Rolls-Royce F-130 engines. The F-130 is a military variant of the BR-725 commercial engine used on Gulfstream business jets. It delivers approximately 30% better fuel efficiency than the TF-33, while requiring far less maintenance. Rolls-Royce projects that the new engines will remain installed for the remainder of the aircraft's service life, without requiring traditional depot-level overhauls. The 8-engine configuration is retained because converting to 4 larger engines would require extensive structural modifications to the wing that would cost more than the engines themselves. The new radar system is the AN/APQ-188, an active electronically scanned array derived from the APG-79 radar used on the FA-18 Super Hornet fighter. The system flew on a B-52 for the first time on December 8, 2025. Unlike the mechanically scanned antennas of previous B-52 radars, the new system electronically steers its beam with no moving parts, providing dramatically improved reliability and capability. The Communications Suite upgrade, designated CONECT, integrates Link 16 digital data links that allow the aircraft to share targeting information with fighters, ships, and ground controllers in real time. New digital displays replace the analog instruments and cathode ray tube screens that dated to the 1960s. The internal weapons bay upgrade provides a 66% increase in smart weapons capacity. And critically, the B-52J will carry the Long-Range Standoff Cruise Missile, a new nuclear-capable weapon designed to replace the aging AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile that dates to the 1980s. The B-52's projected service life now extends into the late 2050s. The youngest airframes, built in 1962, will approach 100 years of age if those projections hold. The aircraft's longevity has created something unprecedented in military aviation. Multiple generations of the same family have flown the same aircraft type, and in some cases potentially the same individual airframes. The most thoroughly documented case involves the Welch and Sprague family. Colonel Don Sprague flew every variant from the A through H during a career spanning decades. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for combat missions over North Vietnam and commanded the 23rd Bomb Squadron at Minot Air Force Base. His grandson, Captain Daniel Welch, arrived at Minot in January 2011 as a B-52H aircraft commander, assigned to the same squadron his grandfather had commanded years earlier. At Barksdale Air Force Base, the Marks family spans 3 generations. Retired Major General Don Marks flew Cold War nuclear alert missions when the B-52H was factory new. His grandson, Captain Zach Marks, graduated from B-52 training at Barksdale. With the bomber projected to remain in service past 2050, the family has observed that Captain Marks's young son could potentially become a 4th-generation B-52 pilot. General Marks once described the experience of flying the aircraft by saying it is just like sitting on your front porch, flying your house. The B-52 holds records that have never been surpassed. On January 10 through 11, 1962, Serial 600040, the very last B-52 ever built, flew 12,532 miles non-stop from Kadena, Okinawa, to Torrejon, Spain, setting the world record for longest unrefueled flight by a jet aircraft. That record stands to this day. On January 16 through 18, 1957, 3 B-52Bs completed the first jet-powered non-stop circumnavigation of Earth, covering 24,325 miles in 45 hours and 19 minutes and earning the prestigious Mach trophy. The NB-52B, nicknamed Balls 8, served as the mothership for 140 of the X-15 program's rocket-powered research flights. On its final mission in November 2004, it launched the X-43A scramjet demonstrator to nearly Mach 10, setting the world record for an air-breathing engine. Stanley Kubrick's 1964 film Dr. Strangelove featured a B-52 crew as its central characters. The Air Force refused all cooperation with the production, denying Kubrick any access to actual aircraft. Working with only publicly available technical manuals and a single photograph from a magazine, Kubrick and production designer Ken Adam constructed a cockpit set so accurate that Air Force personnel who saw the film were convinced the production team had somehow infiltrated a bomber base and photographed classified interior details. General Curtis LeMay once warned that he feared the B-52 would fall apart before they could build a replacement. He said that in the 1960s. LeMay died on October 1, 1990. The B-52 remains in service, has outlived every aircraft designed to replace it, and will continue flying long after the B-1 and B-2 are gone. The B-52 Stratofortress defies every assumption about military technology. In an age that values stealth and speed and computational sophistication, the most enduring combat aircraft ever built is a subsonic, radar-visible, 8-engined design from the Eisenhower administration. Its survival is ruthlessly practical. The airframe was conservatively engineered with structural margins that remain safe well beyond current utilization, with the fleet still operating far below the 32,500-hour fatigue ceiling. Its operating costs run roughly one-third those of the B-2 Spirit. Its maintenance reliability exceeds both the B-1 and B-2. The deeper truth is that flexibility outperforms optimization. The XB-70 Valkyrie was optimized for Mach 3. Missiles killed it. The B-1 was optimized for low-altitude penetration. Structural fatigue ground it down. The B-2 was optimized for stealth. Cost strangled it. The B-52 was optimized for nothing in particular. It was simply big, strong, and adaptable. Every new weapon, sensor, communication system, and targeting technology of the past 7 decades has found a home somewhere in that capacious airframe. The B-52J, with Rolls-Royce turbofans, an electronically scanned radar, satellite data links, and hypersonic weapons, will be as different from the 1962 original as a smartphone is from a rotary telephone, yet it will fly on the same wings, the same fuselage, the same landing gear designed in a hotel room over a single weekend in October 1948. When the B-1 and B-2 finally retire, as the old Air Force saying goes, their pilots will be flown home from the boneyard aboard a B-52. If current projections hold, bombers built during the Kennedy administration will still be flying combat missions when the grandchildren of today's pilots take the controls. The B-52 Stratofortress is the airplane that refused to die, not from stubbornness, but because no one has ever built anything better at doing everything it does.